At 4 o'clock hours on February 7, 1945, Corporal James Theodore Mackenzie crouched in a shell crater about 200 yards behind the American lines near Bastogne, Belgium. The cold was vicious, relentless. The thermometer had sunk to 14 degrees below zero, the kind of cold that stole your breath and made fingers feel like they belonged to someone else. Clutched in his gloved hands, a dented canteen cup held a crude mixture of axle grease and diesel fuel, sloshing faintly as he stirred it with a screwdriver. The plan he had meticulously devised over the past 3 weeks seemed insane. Impossible. And yet, in Mackenzie's mind, it was the only chance to stop the steel monsters rolling toward their lines. At just 22 years old, with 11 months of combat already etched into his face and 2 Purple Hearts pinned to his chest, Mackenzie had learned one hard truth: the war didn't reward patience or caution. It rewarded ingenuity, decisiveness, and a willingness to embrace risk when everything else had failed. He had watched the German Tiger tanks in horror over the past month. The monstrous vehicles, with frontal armor up to 180 mm thick, shrugged off bazooka rounds like mere irritations. American tank destroyers could barely dent them, and Sherman crews, well, Mackenzie had seen them wiped out, one after another, their tanks shredded before they even had a chance to aim properly. Behind him, Sergeant Frank Holloway shifted uneasily, arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon as though willing the younger man's plan to dissolve into common sense. "You're wasting your time, Mac," Holloway said, his voice a rasp against the frozen wind. "We need you on the machine gun, not playing chemist with kitchen supplies." Mackenzie didn't look up. He'd been thinking about this for weeks. Ever since he had seen a Tiger tank casually shrug off 6 bazooka rounds in a matter of seconds, he had begun to calculate alternatives. This was no mere hunch, it was mechanical analysis combined with the intuition born of living in northern Minnesota, where winter temperatures regularly plunged to 40 below. He knew what happened to machinery when lubricants froze. He knew what happened to moving parts when the grease hardened in extreme cold. "You think anyone's going to let us try it?" Holloway asked, skepticism threading his words. "That's the problem," Mackenzie muttered. He glanced down at the mixture in the canteen cup. "We don't need permission. We need results." The Battle of the Bulge had been raging for 53 brutal days, with the Germans pressing their advantage, sending wave after wave of infantry and armor toward the American positions. Intelligence reports had warned of an 8 Tiger push aimed directly at their sector. If even half reached their positions, it could mean death for the entire company. Mackenzie's mind played through the statistics as he stirred the mixture again. 1 Tiger could destroy 5 Shermans before taking significant damage. That math was not just brutal, it was lethal. And the German crews knew it. The Americans knew it. Morale was bleeding out, one mangled foxhole at a time. For days ago, Mackenzie had witnessed the horrifying precision of these armored behemoths. A Tiger had parked itself 300 yards from their line, seemingly invincible. For 2 hours, it methodically demolished machine gun nests. Mortar pits, and supply dumps, each shot a calculated message of dominance. When it finally withdrew, 14 American soldiers lay dead, forward positions flattened. That night, huddled in his frostbitten cot, Mackenzie began thinking about axle grease. Now, Holloway's skeptical eyes were fixed on the dented canteen. "And you plan to do what, exactly? Pour it into the turret?" "No," Mackenzie said, finally lifting his gaze. "I'll spray it on the turret ring." Holloway's brow furrowed. "You're insane. That gap's tiny. That's the bearing, the turret bearing. If you get anywhere near it, you'll be crawling under a tank that can crush you without thinking twice." Mackenzie nodded, understanding the magnitude of the risk. "Exactly. But if I can get the mixture into that gap, it'll seep down into the bearing race, mix with the grease, and when the temperature drops tonight, it'll freeze solid. Turret won't rotate. Firepower gone. 1 tank neutralized. Maybe more, if the cold does its work." The sergeant shook his head, staring at the ruined landscape, the frozen bodies and splintered wood of American defenses. You'd have to get within 10 yards of a Tiger. Stay there long enough to coat the turret ring while German infantry sweeps the area. You'd have to survive. And then, pray it works. You'd be gone before anyone knew you were there. I know, Mackenzie said quietly. But it's the only shot we have. I've worked the ratios, the timing, the penetration. It's the only way. Holloway sighed, the wind cutting across the crater. Get your supplies ready. Move at 0600. German armor usually hits at 0730. That gives you 90 minutes. By 5:45, Mackenzie moved through the pre-dawn darkness, carrying his rifle, 4 glass bottles filled with the frozen grease mixture, and a hand-pump spray canister liberated from the battalion aid station. The American forward line was 200 yards ahead. Beyond that, no man's land stretched another 300 yards toward the German positions. He needed cover along the expected Tiger advance route. He needed a shell crater or a ruined building where he could remain unseen until the perfect moment. By 6:15, he found a partially destroyed farmhouse, its roof collapsed but cellar intact. Sliding into the rubble, Mackenzie positioned himself near the hole in the cellar wall overlooking the road. From here, the German Tigers would pass within 20 yards, close enough to strike, close enough to die. At 7:23, the rumble came. Engines, deep and guttural, shaking the frozen ground. Tiger tanks. Maybach HL-230 engines, 12 cylinders, 690 horsepower, pushing 56 tons at 24 miles per hour on roads, slower cross-country. Mackenzie's calculations went into overdrive. Weak points, vulnerabilities, timing, everything he had studied for weeks converged into the next 30 seconds of action. The first Tiger rolled past at 7:30, engine grinding, turret rotating, commander scanning the horizon. Infantry followed behind, 40 soldiers at least. Mackenzie stayed still. The first tank wasn't enough. He needed multiple targets. Needed proof that his gamble could affect more than one vehicle. Seconds later, the second Tiger appeared. Then a third. And a fourth. 5 Tigers in total, strung along the road, crushing earth and morale beneath their tracks. Mackenzie counted them carefully, noting speed, distance, and the dispersion of infantry. Timing was everything. Wait until the last squad of German infantry passed, move while they were distracted. He would have one chance to implement the plan. One chance to alter the course of the attack. Creeping out of the cellar, Mackenzie carried his spray canister, moving low through the broken terrain. 50 yards. 40. 30. 20. The Tiger's engine roared, covering his movements. 10 yards. Exhaust hot on his face. Crawling under the massive machine. He aimed the spray canister at the turret ring and began pumping. The mixture sprayed out in a fine mist, seeping into the bearing. 3 bottles emptied, then the 4th. 70% of the circumference covered, enough, he hoped, to disable the turret. Dropping the canister, he began retreating, a German voice shouted. Mackenzie rolled behind rubble, fired, dropped 2 soldiers, then ran toward the American lines. The Tiger's assault began in earnest. Shells screamed, gunfire shredded the landscape. And somewhere, in that chaos, the frozen grease was taking hold. At 8 o'clock, Mackenzie returned to the American lines. Holloway approached, awe in his eyes. The 4th Tiger, the one he had coated, was immobile. Turret frozen. Commander shouting orders that could not be executed. Temperature dropping, crystallizing the grease further. 1 tank neutralized, and the war of mechanics and ingenuity had begun. For the first hour, Mackenzie didn't speak. He watched as his gamble unfolded, a single man's desperate experiment shaking the advance of one of the most fearsome machines of the war. 4 out of 5 Tigers would eventually seize up, the Germans unable to comprehend the sudden mechanical failures. Without turret mobility, the tanks were steel coffins. American forces began firing from prepared positions, halting the German advance. Mackenzie's frozen grease trick had worked. By noon, the battalion understood what had happened. Mackenzie's daring, his risk, his ingenuity, had stopped the armored advance. Corps intelligence wanted to replicate the mixture across other units. Mackenzie cared little for accolades. He cared only that his squad survived, that lives were spared by the strange alchemy of grease and diesel, frozen under a Belgian winter sky. By 12:30, the snow-covered fields outside Bastogne had become a chaotic tapestry of war, steel, fire, and ice. The German advance had ground to a halt, not by sheer numbers or brute force, but by the meticulous, almost absurd ingenuity of one young corporal from Minnesota. Mackenzie's gamble, the frozen grease mixture sprayed into the turret ring of the 4th Tiger, had proven the concept worked. But the battle was far from over. The remaining Tigers were faltering. The 5th Tiger, the one he had not sprayed directly, was moving sluggishly, its turret grinding against the contaminated bearing grease. Mackenzie watched through the smoke and snow from the relative cover of a crater, breathing shallow, trying not to give himself away. His rifle rested across his knees, fingers trembling not from fear alone but from the bitter cold that bit through his gloves. He had survived the most dangerous part, crawling within mere yards of a Tiger tank, but that did not mean the danger had passed. Holloway approached, careful, alert. "It's working," he said softly, almost in disbelief. "The others, look at them. They're freezing up." His voice carried a mix of relief and astonishment. "I've never seen German armor stall like that, not even from direct hits." Mackenzie nodded. "It's not the shots. It's the cold. The grease. Once it crystallizes, there's nothing they can do to move the turret." He felt a grim satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that the Germans' infantry still pressed forward, using the immobilized Tigers as cover. One misstep, one bullet, and he could still die. Across the frozen landscape, the Tigers began to experience mechanical havoc. The 2nd Tiger's turret slowed, faltering slightly, its crew struggling to engage targets. Mackenzie watched, analyzing every movement, calculating every potential outcome. By 9:45, the 3rd Tiger had completely seized, its turret locked solid. The crew frantically tried to operate the hydraulics, banging levers and pulling on mechanisms, but the mixture had penetrated too deeply, crystallizing in the extreme cold. The engines roared, tracks grinding against frozen earth. But the tanks were effectively immobilized weapons, threats without function. Mackenzie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He realized that his gamble had not only neutralized German armor but had shifted the entire dynamic of the battlefield. Where before the Tigers had been nearly unstoppable, now they were vulnerable, their crews bewildered and frustrated. Infantry, dependent on armored cover, found themselves exposed. And the Americans, hidden in prepared positions with tank destroyers ready, could now take aim at immobilized steel. The battle raged around him. Artillery shells screamed overhead, plumes of snow and earth erupting from frozen ground. Mortars fired in rhythmic volleys, the cracks echoing across the valley. Mackenzie's squad took casualties, men falling where they stood, the snow turning red in places. But the Tigers' incapacitation created gaps in the German lines, and 3rd Squad exploited them. Machine guns opened up, taking advantage of the immobilized armor to suppress enemy infantry. Mortars targeted clusters of soldiers that had relied on the tank's firepower for cover. Holloway crawled over to Mackenzie, keeping low. "You did this," he said, almost in a whisper. "Your work. That Tiger there, the 4th one, is dead in the water." He nodded toward the tank, turret frozen, commander screaming orders that could not be executed. "It's like someone hit pause on the battlefield." Mackenzie allowed himself a brief exhale. He could see the immediate effects of his work. The Germans were improvising desperately. Crews dismounted from immobilized Tigers, attempting to repair the mechanisms. Soldiers scrambled over the frozen ground, trying to shield their commanders and regain control. But nothing worked. The extreme cold had locked the grease in place, turning the finely tuned machinery of the turret into an immovable mass. By 10:30, the results were undeniable. 4 out of 5 Tigers were effectively neutralized. Unable to rotate their turrets and, in effect, blind to everything outside a narrow frontal arc, American tank destroyers, hidden in prepared positions, took full advantage, hitting 2 Tigers directly from the side. Fire and smoke erupted from their turrets, and the crews abandoned the vehicles in panic. The remaining 2 tanks retreated, abandoning the attack entirely, while their crews attempted to reorganize as infantry. Mackenzie watched it all, tension and adrenaline coursing through him, knowing the danger was far from over. Meanwhile, the Americans were exploiting the frozen landscape, artillery and small arms fire synchronized with the immobilized German armor. Mackenzie's gamble had turned what would have been a near-certain disaster into a defensive opportunity. But the battle demanded vigilance. Any misstep, and the remaining Tiger could wreak havoc. Any oversight, and Third Squad could be wiped out. He stayed crouched in the snow, eyes scanning every movement, calculating angles, tracking enemy soldiers and armored vehicles. As the morning wore on, Lieutenant Morrison arrived on the forward line, surveying the battlefield with a mixture of disbelief and awe. "Sergeant Holloway tells me you had something to do with those Tigers jamming," he said, voice steady but incredulous. "And that you went forward without orders, exposed yourself to enemy fire, implementing some kind of chemistry experiment?" Mackenzie didn't respond immediately. He simply watched as the battlefield unfolded, the snow swirling around burning tanks and retreating soldiers. Holloway spoke for him. "Yes, sir. That's his work. And it saved us." Morrison remained quiet for a moment, processing the gravity of what had happened. Then, he spoke with measured approval. "Corpus Intelligence wants to know more. They're calling your grease mixture a battlefield innovation. They want to replicate it, distribute it to other units. Apparently, some colonel believes this could work on a larger scale." Mackenzie shrugged, indifferent. The accolades mattered less than the fact that Third Squad had survived, that the German advance had stalled, that lives had been spared. He had risked death for a mechanical theory, and it had worked. The frozen grease trick was real, lethal in its simplicity, and utterly effective.